The morning of November 15th, 1852, Mary Belle Carawan walked out of her house and across the field toward the tree line. She was 37 years old. She had lived in this house for 13 years, first as a housekeeper, then as a wife. The farm sat at the edge of Lake Mattamuskeet, the largest freshwater lake in North Carolina, flat and gray in the November light. The nearest town of any size was a full day's ride. She was carrying a gun. It was wrapped in her apron. She walked to the edge of the woods. She turned around. She walked back. The field between the house and the tree line was roughly 200 yards across. Open ground, flat, no cover. A woman standing at the edge of those woods would have been visible from the house. She also would have been close enough to hear whatever happened inside them. Her husband did not come home until sundown. By the time anyone thought to ask Mary Carawan what she had been doing that afternoon, the man who had once stepped between her and her husband's fists was already in the ground. His name was Clement Lassiter, and he had been a schoolteacher. Hyde County, North Carolina, in 1850, was not a place where news traveled fast. The county sat on a peninsula between Pamlico Sound and the Carolina interior, rimmed by swamp and shallow water. Roads turned to mud in winter. The mail came once a week, sometimes less. A man could live his entire life within 20 miles of where he was born and consider that a full life. In this world, the Reverend George Washington Carawan was about as close to an institution as a single man could be. 25 years in the ministry, with spiritual authority over the old-school Baptist churches in 4 counties and more than 500 men and women baptized under his hands, led into the dark water of the local creeks, and brought back up. Hyde County, in 1850, had a free population of roughly 3,000 people. 4 counties together, Hyde, Beaufort, Carteret, Tyrrell, perhaps 12,000. 500 baptisms, spread across 25 years, meant that almost every family in those counties had sent someone into the water under Carawan's hands. The man sitting in judgment of him in November of 1853 may well have been one of them. He refused any salary for his work, and that refusal mattered. No one could accuse him of doing it for money. He lived on Rose Bay Farm, a large property at the edge of the lake, and owned several enslaved people. Travelers and strangers were welcome to stay, to eat, to rest. Neighbors remembered his hospitality as almost boyish, spending freely, keeping an open table. The 1850 census shows his household: his wife Mary, 37, 4 boys, the youngest just 4 years old. His nephew, Carawan Sawyer, 17, listed as a laborer, 2 other workers, a full house by any measure. What the census does not show is what happened inside it. North Carolina law in 1852 gave a married woman no property rights separate from her husband, no independent income, no claim to her children if she left. Her legal identity, in almost every practical sense, was his. The Baptist congregations of 4 counties trusted George Carawan with their souls. The law of North Carolina gave Mary Carawan no exit. Elizabeth Caro Carawan died in 1839. Her symptoms, neighbors said afterward, resembled arsenic poisoning. No one investigated, no inquest, no formal inquiry of any kind. She was buried, and that was the end of it. 3 weeks later, George Carawan married Mary Belle, the woman who had been keeping his house. He wore the same suit to both occasions. It was not the first time Carawan had accused someone close to him of an improper attachment to his wife. Years earlier, he had driven his own brother Green from Goose Creek Island, accusing him of paying too much attention to Elizabeth. When Green died, Carawan inherited his congregation. A young woman named Polly Richards brought a paternity suit against him sometime in the 1840s. Carawan was removed from his church. He repented. He was reinstated. The child, his child by the court's finding, came to live in the Carawan household. The child died at the age of 3. The cause was not recorded. Mary Carawan was in that house for all 3 of those years. She cooked the meals, kept the fire, managed the household where this child lived and where this child died. No source records what she made of it. The death certificate, if one existed, has not survived. None of this, taken alone, was enough to move anyone in Hyde County to action. Carawan was powerful. His congregation believed in him. In a county where the nearest courthouse was hours away by road, a man's reputation was often the only law that applied. By the spring of 1852, Clement Lassiter arrived at Rose Bay Farm. Clement H. Lassiter was a schoolteacher. That is most of what the record gives us. Quiet, the people who knew him said, reserved, well-liked by his students and by the parents who sent them to him, which, for a teacher working in isolated rural communities, was the whole of his professional world. He had recently finished a term at a school on Rose Bay and had been engaged to teach at another near Lake Matamaskeet. He came to board at the Carawan house because that was what schoolteachers did in Hyde County in 1852. There were no boarding houses to speak of, no inns. If you were passing through or working nearby, you stayed with a family who had room, and you paid for the privilege. Lassiter paid. By every account, he was an unassuming man. He does not appear in any document, before or after, as someone who looked for trouble. The evening before he left, he told his new landlord, a farmer named Dorset Mason, that he was afraid to walk the turnpike road past Carawan's house. The turnpike through Hyde County was not a paved road. It was a raised gravel causeway built across swampland, narrow enough that two men walking in opposite directions would have to step aside for each other, with drainage ditches on both sides and thick scrub beyond them. There was no way around Carawan's property. The causeway ran directly past his front field, and the woods that bordered it on the east were dense enough that a man could step off the road and disappear in 30 seconds. Mason remembered that conversation later, when it mattered. On the morning of November 15th, Lassiter picked up his carpet bag and started up the road toward the lake. A traveler's bag, soft-sided, the kind a man carried when everything he needed fit in one hand. He stopped to talk with several neighbors along the way. A normal morning. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he passed the Carawan property. No one who knew him saw him alive again. After Lassiter stepped between Mary Carawan and her husband's fists, Carawan did what he had always done when someone stood in his way. He used what he had. He told his neighbors, openly, that Lassiter had been too familiar with his wife. Then he brought Mary before the local magistrates and had her testify that Lassiter had treated her criminally. The magistrates declined to act. They could see what was happening, and they were not willing to be the instrument of it. Lassiter responded by filing a slander suit seeking $2,000 in damages, roughly 2 years of wages for a working man in Hyde County in 1852. Not a small sum, a public one. Carawan spoke freely after that. Lassiter ought to be shot, he told his neighbors. The two of them could not go on living in the same county. He said these things to multiple people in ordinary conversation, as though they were reasonable positions. The People's Press of Salem, North Carolina, reported in January of 1853 on letters it had received from Hyde, Tyrrell, and Beaufort counties. The letters described how Carawan had knocked his wife down with a chair, beaten her until the chair broke, then picked up a large stick and continued, until a man named Lassiter, who boarded in the house, stepped in to stop what the letter's author called an attempt at murder. Carawan had turned on Lassiter then, reaching for his gun. Lassiter had disarmed him and walked out of the house with it. A man who had spent 30 years answering challenges from the pulpit had been answered in his own front room by a schoolteacher who weighed less than he did. The slander suit was filed 2 weeks later. The threats started shortly after that. Mary Bell had come to Rose Bay Farm as a housekeeper. She was not from money. She was not from influence. She was a working woman in a county where working women had very few places to land, and she had landed here. cooking, cleaning, managing the household of a prominent minister and his wife. When Elizabeth Carawan died in 1839, Mary was already in the house. 3 weeks later, she was the wife. She had been in that house since 1839. By the time Clement Lassiter arrived in the spring of 1852, she had lived inside that marriage for 13 years. By 1852, she had 4 sons under the age of 10. Carawan beat her regularly. Neighbors knew, the congregation knew. No one intervened, no one except Lassiter. The 1850 census lists one other woman in the household besides Mary. Emmeline Bell, 19 years old, no stated occupation. The same surname as Mary's before her marriage. The record does not specify the relationship. She appears in that census column, and nowhere else in the surviving documents. Whatever she saw in that house, she left no account of it. Under North Carolina law in the 1850s, a wife who left took nothing with her. Not the house, not the farm, not the furniture, not her children. The courts gave custody to the father, as a matter of course. When Carawan brought her before the magistrates to testify against Lassiter, she went. When he handed her a gun, wrapped in an apron, and walked her to the edge of the woods on a November afternoon, she went. She turned around before the tree line. She came back to the house. What passed through her mind at that edge, whether she heard anything, whether she understood what was happening 20 yards into those trees, no source records. The Sunday night before he died, Clement Lassiter told Dorset Mason he was afraid. He had to go to the school at Lake Mattamuskeet. He had a new term beginning, but he did not want to walk the turnpike road, the one that ran past Carawan's property. Mason listened. He did not have an answer for him. Monday morning, Lassiter picked up his carpetbag and went anyway. He had no other road. He stopped at several houses along the way. People remembered speaking with him, a quiet man, walking, carrying his bag. Those conversations, a few words at a gate, a nod across a fence, became testimony months later. The neighbors who had spoken with Lassiter that morning had no reason at the time to remember anything in particular. By the time they were asked to recall the details, Lassiter had been in the ground for weeks. Around 3 in the afternoon, he passed the Carawan place. Shortly after, Carawan left the house and moved across the open field toward the woods, between the farm and the road. Mary walked behind him with the gun in her apron. She came back alone. In November in Hyde County, the sun sets before 5 o'clock. Lassiter passed the Carawan property around 3. That left roughly 2 hours. 2 hours in the November woods, with a body, before Carawan walked back across the field and into his house. That night, he did not sleep at home. After dark, he went to Seth. Seth was enslaved on the Carawan property. He was around 32 years old. In any court in North Carolina, his word counted for nothing. Not to file a complaint, not to refuse an order, not to testify against the man who owned him. Carawan told him he had killed Lassiter. He said they had to go into the woods and bury the body. Seth went. They bound Lassiter's body tight, the way you would truss an animal for slaughter. They dragged it through the November swamp, through the mud and the dark water and the roots, to a spot Carawan had chosen. Carawan cut away the turf with a knife. They dug with sticks. They dug with their bare hands. They put the body in the ground and pressed the turf back over it. Seth walked back to the farm in the dark. He did not speak of it, not yet. The law did not allow him to. A few days after the murder, Lassiter's friends began to worry. He had not arrived at the school. He had not sent word. People who had spoken with him on the road that Monday started comparing notes. On a Saturday afternoon, 2 men searching the woods on either side of the turnpike came across a mossy patch in a dense thicket. A few clumps of loose earth, a decaying laurel branch across the ground. Nothing obviously wrong. They dug anyway. Beneath the turf, in a shallow grave, was the body of Clement Lassiter. Buckshot, 3 different sizes. The same 3 sizes currently loaded in George Carawan's gun. Carawan heard about the discovery within hours. He found his nephew Carawan Sawyer and Seth and told them, "Boys, I must go away, or I shall be hung." He offered Sawyer a deal, Seth's freedom, transferred in writing, in exchange for a sworn statement that Carawan had been home all day that Monday. Sawyer did not take it. Carawan packed his bags and left North Carolina. He went by train and steamboat to Chattanooga, Tennessee, roughly 400 miles. He took a new name there, John Forbes. He gave power of attorney to a friend back home, with instructions to sell the farm and everything on it. The friend, having had time to think about what he knew, refused. But Carawan could not stop preaching. Under his new name, in a new city, he kept standing up before congregations. It was the one constant in him, even in flight. Word reached North Carolina that John Forbes of Chattanooga preached exactly like George Carawan of Hyde County. Carawan came back. He had property to sell, and he needed to do it himself. He made his way quietly to Goose Creek Island, where he still had supporters, men and women he had baptized. He stayed there for a time, moving carefully, trying to arrange the sale of his farm at a distance. Then, in the dead of night, he went home. He wanted to see Mary. He slipped into the house quietly, sometime after midnight, and found her. Seth saw him come in. Seth had dug the grave with his bare hands. He had been offered his own freedom as the price of a lie, and had not taken it. The courts of North Carolina had ruled, for generations, that his silence was the natural order of things. He went to the neighbors anyway. By the time the sun came up, a crowd had gathered around the house. George Carawan was arrested inside it, in the house he had walked home to in the middle of the night, in the county where everyone knew exactly who he was. In the Beaufort County Jail, waiting for trial, Carawan wrote letters. He had supporters still, men who believed in him or who had reasons of their own to want him free. The letters were specific. Carawan Sawyer, his nephew, the young man who had refused the bribe and who had seen too much, needed to leave town, by any means necessary, lawful or otherwise. The implication was clear enough to anyone reading carefully. The letters did not reach their recipients. The jailer intercepted them. They were turned over to the prosecution and entered into evidence. At trial, they were read aloud in open court. Carawan Sawyer, for his part, did not leave town. He stayed. He testified. From a jail cell facing a murder charge, Carawan had tried to arrange the silencing of the one witness who could place him at the scene. The trial began on November 23, 1853, in the Superior Court of Beaufort County. Carawan told Mary he expected to be acquitted. They would go back to Hyde County, back to the farm. He said this with enough certainty that she stayed close. The prosecution built its case on what people had seen and heard. Neighbors testified that Carawan had said, more than once, that Lassiter ought to be shot. Witnesses placed him moving toward the woods on the afternoon of November 15th, carrying a gun. The buckshot recovered from Lassiter's body matched the load in Carawan's weapon. 3 calibers, an unusual combination. Carawan Sawyer testified about the bribe, about what his uncle had said when the body was found, about seeing him with the gun that day. Then the prosecution read the letters. The defense challenged everything. The witnesses were lying or mistaken. The murder might not have happened on a Monday at all. Sawyer's testimony contradicted what he had told the coroner's jury months earlier. The judge, working through his instructions to the jury, seemed inclined to agree. He told the 12 men that Sawyer's contradictory testimony should be set aside. The jury went out. 30 minutes later, the judge called them back. He had reconsidered. The jury should use its own judgment in weighing what Sawyer had said. Carawan had been certain he was going free. After the second instruction, he was not. He asked that Mary and his 3 sons be allowed to spend the night in the jail. They came. The youngest boy was 7 years old. They stayed until morning. The verdict came on the last day of November. The jury filed in. The foreman spoke. Guilty. The defense asked that the jury be polled. Each man called by name asked to confirm his vote individually. One by one, 12 men said the same word. The judge thanked them and released them. George Carawan reached into his shirt. He was standing in the prisoner's box, a low wooden enclosure, open at the top, set to one side of the courtroom floor. It was where the accused stood to hear the verdict. It was also, as it turned out, where a man could conceal 2 pistols under his shirt for an entire morning without being searched. He pulled out the first and fired at E.J. Warren, the prosecuting attorney, from across the room. The ball struck just above Warren's heart and glanced. A serious wound, not a fatal one. Warren did not fall. Deputy Sheriff Hinton moved toward Carawan. Carawan pulled out the second pistol. The People's Press of Salem, North Carolina, reported the scene while it was still unfolding, the ink barely dry. A report of a pistol was heard, followed immediately by another. Carawan had 2 self-cocking single-barrel pistols. With one he aimed at Mr. Warren. The ball struck just above his heart and glanced, making but a slight wound. With the other, he shot a hole through his own head. As we are going to press, he lies a corpse in the prisoner's box. As may well be supposed, there is intense excitement in the community. The courtroom emptied fast. People moved for the doors. Warren was still standing, bleeding but standing. Hinton had his hands on Carawan when the second shot went off. In the wooden box, Carawan went down. He had brought the guns in that morning. He had said his goodbyes the night before, with Mary and his boys in the jail cell. He had told fellow prisoners he would not be coming back to face a hanging. 25 years of ministry, 500 souls led into the water under his hands, churches built across 4 counties, and 2 pistols hidden under his shirt when he walked into court. After George Carawan died on the floor of the Beaufort County Courthouse, Seth told the truth. He could not have done it before. North Carolina law was clear. An enslaved person could not testify against their enslaver in a court of law. As long as Carawan lived, Seth had no voice the law would recognize. Now Carawan was dead. Seth described the night of November 15th. He described what Carawan said when he came in the dark. He described the walk through the swamp, the weight of the body, the knife cutting through the turf, the digging with sticks and bare hands in the cold mud, a year of silence given up in one accounting. He gave that testimony in the winter of 1853. North Carolina did not ratify the 13th Amendment until December of 1865, 12 years later. In the interval, Hyde County went through secession, war, occupation, and Reconstruction. Seth Carawan went through all of it too, in the same county, on the same ground, a free man in every practical sense after Carawan's death, but not in any legal one until the war was over and the amendment passed. Some who had followed the investigation believed Seth had done something else, that it may have been Seth who led the searchers, a week after the murder, to that mossy patch in the thicket. The newspapers called it the Finger of Providence. The record offers no confirmation either way. The census of 1870 recorded Seth Carawan in Hyde County, North Carolina. He was around 50 years old. He had a wife named Hetty and 4 children. One of them he had named Charlie. The record offers no explanation, no letter, no interview, no entry in any ledger. Just the name, written in a census column in a county Seth had never left. The same county where, 18 years earlier, he had dug a grave in the dark with his bare hands and then walked home and said nothing, because nothing he said would have mattered. He gave the boy the name anyway.